Hey, Whiskey Ringers. I am thrilled to welcome back Impex Beverages as the Whiskey Ring Podcast presenting sponsor. Each month, we'll be talking about a new set of single casks, maybe feature a chosen distillery, or single cask from a chosen distillery. Listen for the mid-roll for more info on this month's offerings. And now, a brand new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hey, Whiskey Ringers. Welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. This week, we're going over to England again. And shouldn't really say again. We've only gone over a couple of times, but this time we're going straight to the heart of the issue. We're going to London to visit Bimber Distillery. And with us, we've got Matt McKay. Matt, welcome.
Hey, David. How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yourself?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Delighted to be joining you here today.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, let's start not quite at the beginning of the Bimber story, but more about, what you do at Bimber. Like, what's your role, both stated and not stated?
Sure. So I have a pretty weird, convoluted job nowadays. So part of my time is spent with Bimber Distillery, and part of my time is spent with our second distillery, Dunphail, which we are constructing in Scotland. And they're kind of two jobs that are related, but they are a bit different. So at Bimber, I'm responsible for marketing, communications, cask assessment, and product development. And it's such a small distillery, as I'm sure we'll talk about. Everyone kind of has to get stuck into everything. Up at Dunphail, our constructing distillery, I'm the director of whiskey creation. So my role there specifically is managing the wood policy, looking after the casks as they mature, and then as we get to the point down the line in the future when we actually have whiskey that is of age, I'll be the one presenting Darius, who's the founder, effectively with my creations as suggestions for how we shape that spirit into whiskey and finally onto a product that we want to present to the market. But as you say, everybody gets involved in everything. I'm regularly doing interviews either about Bimber or English whiskey or about myself. And I do take an active role effectively as an ambassador, going out on the road, hosting tastings, and yeah, just sort of one of those whiskey geeks who loves to get involved in every single part of the process as much as possible.
Love it, love it. It's one of the few areas where when you say people wear many hats, they're actually happy about it. So it's
Yeah.
a different change.
That's
So,
true.
so just to provide some extra context, so I think I'd heard about Bimber, not a ton to be completely honest. But then I got talking to Raj Sabharwal, who's the importer for
Yep.
Bimber for the U.S. And when I talked to Raj for an episode of the podcast, he brought on Bimber as one of the brands to talk about. And we talked about a single cask for that was an ex bourbon cask. It was delicious. It was clearly different. It was unique in its flavor profile. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Um, but we didn't so much go into the origin story of Bimber, and I do know every podcast is going to ask you what the origin story was, of course. So um, I'll point people to a couple of episodes that I listened to prepare for this interview. I listened to Fermented Adventure, Whiskey
Yep.
Talk, Irish Whiskey Review, and of course the most recent one is the Drammers event that you did last month or a month before, pretty recently.
Yep.
But with all that said, why don't you give us the kind of quick rundown of Bimber's
Sure.
founding and history?
So the quick rundown is that whilst we are an English whiskey distillery and whilst we are in London, our roots, not my roots, but the distillery's roots lie in Poland. The distillery founder Darius and co-founder Ewelina, who is his wife, emigrated from Poland to England a little over 20 years ago. Darius's background is in architecture and engineering and construction. But before that, his father and grandfather were moonshiners in Polish communist times, and that's where the name Bimber comes from. In Polish, it means moonshine. So he already had a pretty good understanding of what distillation is, mainly in Poland using fruit, but distilling using the human senses, smell, sight, taste. no computerization, not necessarily doing things to a timing schedule, 5 minutes here, 16 minutes there, but doing things to a point where your interaction with that spirit, with that distillate, and your human senses would tell you that this is right to you. Having moved over to England to do construction and architecture, he increasingly visited Scotland and just fell in love with it. Fell in love with both the culture and the country, and of course the whiskey, and decided that he wanted to combine those passions. So to take his love of Scotch whiskey, but also with those sort of moonshining roots, with that understanding of distillation and engineering, and to found his own distillery. And in 2015, he had the opportunity to go for it. The site was available in North Acton, just sort of 10 minutes west of central London. And here we are now, quite a few years down the line, and with whiskey that's going to be approaching 7 years of age. So it's been quite the journey, but it all started with Darius's vision, based off of doing some distillation in an illicit fashion, but thinking, well, look, a lot of whiskey has that illicit history to it. Maybe there's something that can actually be taken out of that and brought to the modern era. And so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the flavors of Bimber, but how they're influenced by production and how we make our whiskey. And so right from the off, the story is very much linked to that tradition, that moonshining sense of the human senses, and how we still use those to make the whiskey that we're making today.
I mean, it's a fascinating backstory, and it brings to mind a couple of recent examples I've talked with in the U.S. I mean, usually when someone comes from a background, let's say, and founds a distillery, maybe it's from the wine industry or from the beer industry. Uh, their their family's got 100-year-old recipe, with the yeast carried it between Pappy's toes, kind of thing. But there have been a couple stories recently where people have come from more the kind of architecture and furniture side of things and woodworking. And I'm thinking specifically of Santa Fe Spirits in New Mexico.
Sure.
Their founder Colin was an architect, and then also Whiskey Del Bach in Arizona, where their founder Stephen was a woodworker and a furniture maker. And I do want to point out his I'm not exactly sure when this episode is going to come out, rather, but he just had an expose about him in the Wall Street Journal. That was a wonderful deep dive into his story. So shout out to Stephen. Thank you for coming on the podcast a couple episodes ago. But the point of that was more that there are non-traditional backgrounds that people are getting into the whiskey industry in nowadays. And it's fascinating to see how they bring those into their own distilleries. So we'll get to this a little bit later, but when you say for the new distillery in Dunphail that you're managing wood policy and cask management and
Yeah.
thinking about the future that way, casks and the type of wood being used and how it's being used seems to be a very big part of Bimber's strategy as well right now. And I just wanted to make that connection before I completely forgot about it. The other quick thing was just about, I hadn't thought of this before, but you mentioned that in Poland, so Dariusz and Ewelina is also from Poland, or just Dariusz?
Yeah, correct.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. So with their background in Poland, I guess I had kind of automatically thought that their distilling background or history, family distilling things would have been perhaps grain, especially rye. But it didn't occur to me that it would be fruit.
Fruit. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
In Europe, even to this day, be that illicitly or legally, there is still a big tradition and ongoing heritage around fruit liqueur and fruit spirit distillation. It's a big thing.
Oh yeah. We've talked. I think the first episode of this podcast actually was about, among other things, Rika and Slivovitz and things like that
Exactly. Yeah.
from the area.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this has ever been asked, but how was Dariusz able to kind of take the fruit distilling knowledge, bring it over to now distilling grain? Because I know it's a similar process, but there are enough differences to ask the question.
Yeah, there are an absolute ton of differences, least of all because anything that contains convertible starch into sugar, you can make alcohol from, but they all behave in different ways. You know, some you're going to need to add enzymes to. You obviously can't do that with malt to make malt whiskey, but they're all going to need to be processed and handled and thought about differently. So I'm sure he'd answer that question were he here with the answer of a lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of practice, and probably a lot of failure. We're all coming at Bimber to distillation and whiskey as whiskey geeks. We're very much greater than the sum of our parts. We all have different knowledge, different experiences of whiskey, but none of us come from, a sort of generational, 10 years of distilling, and you simply inherit the distillery and then just carry on what's going on. When Bimber was founded, everything had to be done brand new. This was the first experience of malt distillation that any of us had done. So you take the lessons that you've learned around temperature, around what flavors you want to exhibit through um, fermentation. You take the lessons that you can learn around seeing how other people operate their distilleries, seeing what positives they are there, and seeing what things that actually you might say, you know what, I think we're going to do that a little bit differently. But it all, David, comes down to putting in the hours, um, having a practice, being prepared to fail, and understanding that it's all a learning process. I would say we're pretty good at it now, but we're always still learning. And certainly when it comes to the new distillery up in Scotland, we're looking to open probably around the end of Q1 next year, but we're going to have several months where we're using the kit, we're working the site, and we're understanding what we've installed there, because no matter how you plan something, it always ends up behaving a little bit differently. You've always got to tinker and understand it. So yeah, everything about it is having enough fundamental knowledge that you're not just sort of sticking a pot under some flames and hoping for the best, but equally being prepared to adapt, being prepared, and actually very eager to learn, and eager to push some boundaries. That being said, we do follow some pretty traditional processes that you don't see at a lot of other distilleries, although they are starting to be adopted, even by our next door neighbours in Scotland are starting to go back to some of what I might call the old ways. But nevertheless, they'd probably answer the question in the same way. It's there's a lot of trial and error based on the work of the shoulders of giants that came before you.
And using that as a jumping off point into the kind of nuts and bolts of Bimber first, and because I definitely want to spend some time on Dunphail as well. But with Bimber, you're working now with two Portuguese copper from Hoga, two alembic style stills, each is 1,000 liters. These are, I think, 100% copper stills.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. They are.
Because I know some stills right now are using kind of a stainless steel pot, if you will, and then have everything else above that be copper. But this is 100% copper stills, and I know it's built up a little bit over the years. Since then, you had a 500 before that, and probably smaller ones as well. So with the stills that you have now, uh, let's just start there. How did you end up with ones from Portugal? That's kind of a lesser known source for stills, let's say. And
Sure.
yeah.
So, I mean, the stills are quite interesting. What I would say is that alembic style is fairly common in moonshining. That sort of style of pot um, is preferred in European moonshining. So, in that sense, its design, its shape, and its behavior is a little bit more known. When you compare it to something like a large, I'm going to say industrial still, i.e. something from Forsyths in Scotland, um, those behave very differently, and they wouldn't, for various reasons, work with Bimber's setup. One, because of size. It's very difficult to make stills as small as we need them. We need them small because of the space, but also because we are distilling using direct fire. And that is one thing that it really marks us out as different. There's quite a few differences in our production processes, some which are coming back in terms of long fermentation, but direct fire is one that only a handful of distilleries are really either still operating or bringing back. And the still is, in my opinion, perfect for what we're looking for. It has one disadvantage that I'll come to in a minute, but it's perfect in terms of what we're looking for from direct fire is almost the opposite from what you're looking for from a large, I don't know, 18,000 Forsyth still. When you're using those stills and you're heating with steam, you're looking for pretty even temperature throughout your boiling chamber. That's the objective. What we are looking for from our still and using direct fire is an uneven temperature. What we are doing is we are using the direct fire and the still to create heat spots where within that chamber, some parts of that boiling liquid are hotter than others. And what that is doing is it's burning in unspent yeast and heavier compounds into that spirit. The example I always give to sort of explain what it is and why it is to people is thinking of this as like a water bath, a sous vide steak. You can leave a steak in a bag, vacuum sealed bag for 2 hours, and it comes out and it's beautifully soft and juicy, but it's grey and anemic. There's something missing. And what's missing is the char on it, which provides a little bit of texture, but also that char has flavor and sweetness. And that process of charring a steak is called the Maillard reaction, and that's what we're doing in Bimber Still. We are burning in these compounds into that spirit, and they are adding both sweetness, but particularly texture and weight and mouthfeel into that whiskey. What we have done with those stills is they've been heavily customized. They've had the surface areas increased by dimpling, and we've also refitted the shell and tube condensers. I wouldn't quite call them a worm tub inside, but they're not far off. We've stripped out all of the copper pipe, all the piping, and replaced it with copper coils. So effectively, what we have throughout our process, we have this long, open top fermentation, which is a little bit dirty. It creates so many wonderful estery flavors, but it's a bit dirty. We then have this direct fire distillation, which is burning heavy compounds into the spirit. Again, a bit of a dirty process. But all of these things as part of our plant are creating flavor and texture. And then what we're doing with the stills that we have is we are trying to purify it as much as possible. So these adaptations that we've made to the body of the still, the fairly steep initial angle of the lie arm, and then the customizations we've made to the shell and tube condensers all maximize reflux. So we end up with a spirit that is packed full of flavor and profile and particularly mouthfeel, but it is heavily purified. If we didn't do that, yeah, you'd have this amazingly impactful, big fruity whiskey, but it just wouldn't have the level of purity we're looking for. And that's really what we're looking for from Bimber. We're looking for something that's super fruity, super sort of oily and mouth-filling, but it is still something that you would say, wow, this is quite classy and it feels nice in the mouth. And it's the combination of all these processes that really sort of, in terms of the production side of things, culminates in these special stills with this direct fire that make all that possible.
And I would assume that the angle of the line arm is going to be upwards, steep upwards, leading back into the main body of the still.
Yeah, so I mean, it's almost a bit parabolic. It's vertical initially, so we're really making the spirit fight to get up. But then once it reaches the top of that verticality, it's got this sort of almost ski slope, sort of wee all the way down into the condenser. So you're really pushing the spirit to get up there. But once it does, then it's got a nice gentle path back down, and then it hits the coils in those shell and tubes.
Gotcha. That brings to mind, I think it was Driftless Glen. It was a recent guest on the podcast as well. They kind of they had a Vendome still built for them, and in the process of doing so, some miscommunication happened about the height of their ceiling, um, in relation to the height of the still and the line arm. So they're still it's a leads up into towards the ceiling, but then instead of going straight up because they don't have any room, they got Vendome to install a right angle where
Yeah,
it goes up, hits that point, and just goes straight across. And in doing so, you get some of the same things you're describing. This very heavy, fruity notes and character to the whiskey without making it dirty, or it's still very clean, very fresh. And it reminded me of that as soon as you said it, because it's still, as you said, the whiskey and the spirits are, I should say the spirits, not the whiskey. The spirits are really fighting to get up. Once they get up, they've got plenty of copper contact up there too with the vapors to take as long as they need to go through the process. But in doing so, it's really letting the cleanest flavors come through, the right compounds that you want to get out there.
exactly that. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see so many stills when you visit distilleries where you can just tell that the angle of the arm has had to be influenced because of the height of the ceiling.
Mm.
More often than not, that stills have been replaced. But then people don't think about, oh my God, we've got to take the whole roof off. You'll see distilleries where they're still building the distillery, but the still is already in. And you're like, wow, that's really crazy. There's barely a structure there. But you have to think about it. You've got to get this thing in there. You'll see stills, Glengyle, Kilkerran, where another still has been purchased, it doesn't fit, and then so they'll chop down the neck and then plasma weld it back on. So it's a combination of what you want to achieve from a spirit, in terms of those natural angles and their influences, physically what you can fit in your space, to the point where Bimber could put in much bigger stills, but people forget that if you want to expand capacity, you have to expand it downstream with your plant as well. So, a still that's twice the size means twice as many fermenters. It means twice as much mash. So everything is a product of what you want to get, the environment that you're in, but then also a bit of happenstance. A lot of these distilleries make amazing spirit, and they've done things which at the time you're thinking, well, that's weird, but they just work. And things change. Certainly distillery setups have absolutely changed over the years. Some for the better, some for the worse. Some personal preferences.
Certainly
Um,
fair.
Bimber will be looking, once we've finished our project in Scotland, we will be looking to relocate the distillery. Probably still in the same part of London, certainly in London. All our bottles are branded as single malt London whiskey, so we're not going anywhere. But we do need a bigger space. We need a bigger space to increase production. We're in the fortunate position that everything we make sells out pretty damn quickly. So we need to make a little bit more, not too much, because our processes are very slow and long-winded, but a bit more. More space for cask storage, and more space for a visitor experience.
Hmm.
We've already got one of those stills. We were going to go ahead and do this, and then a funny thing called COVID happened, and it kind of put all these plans to hold. And now we've got busy in Scotland. We've already got a new still, and it's remarkably different. It's not a Hoga still. We've designed it ourselves, but a lot of people come to a distillery and say, "Oh, you've changed this, or you've got this new piece of kit. Is that going to change the flavor of your whiskey?" And it always frustrates me when I visit someone else's site and someone says, "No, it won't." Because the answer is it will. Any change to
Yeah.
inputs or the processes that you make is going to change the whiskey. So yeah, we've got this new still that at some point will be going into a new Bimber, or Bimber 2, as it were, relocated. And we're completely fine with that. Effectively, we see it as a journey. We are not a distillery that is big enough where we want to produce 1 million bottles a year that all taste exactly the same. Consistency is important to us, but it's consistency along a journey. So we've got to the point where everything you're trying now is getting a little bit older, and it's from that still setup that we have that we've just spoken about. That's going to change, and we're completely okay with that, because the more we do it, the more we understand it. So any change we make, we think we'll just keep making it better and better as you go downstream.
And of course, that means the auction and then unfortunately secondary for the quote unquote Bimber one
Yeah, whole whole
bottlings
whole
are going to
different
explode.
conversation, that one.
Yeah. Um,
Yep.
so so going back though, there, that's one limiting factor that you've got, just the location that you've got in London right
Yep.
now. And I would imagine even the new location, as long as you're within the London area, uh, and in these heavy duty manufacturing zones and such, I would think
Yeah.
there's still going to be a limiting factor as to just how big you can go at
Absolutely.
to pair with how big you want to go as well. Um, which brings me to another limiting factor I wanted to then ask about, which was, right now you're getting these all your malt. I think you recently switched over fully to Laureate. You were originally using
Right.
Concerto as well,
Yeah.
um, but all from Fordham and Allen Farm.
Yeah.
So unless you're bringing in more farms, or expanding that farm, or having them expand the farm, I guess, in Hampshire, you're still going to be limited by just how much they can produce for you as well. It is December, which means you're looking for the perfect whiskey to give the people you love this season, including yourself. The bourbon hunt is coming to an end, and some special releases are still to come, but I'm here to offer a different, uniquely sustainable option from our presenting sponsor, Impex Beverages. Ardnamurchan Distillery is one of Scotland's newest producers, located in the Highlands and founded less than a decade ago in 2014. From the start, sustainability has been at the core of their operations. Local, renewable energy fuels the distillery, and the nearby river generates hydroelectric power. Biomass boilers use wood chips from local forestry, and stillage feeds livestock across the peninsula. Their first single malt whiskies came out in 2020 and were immediate successes. The distillery's two signature styles, a peated and unpeated Highland, are matured in two sets of casks. 65% of the liquid goes into ex-bourbon, and 35% into ex-sherry casks, blended at the end for an impressive spirit, redolent with fruitiness, waxy character, and true West Coast Scottish charm. As an aside, for you blockchain lovers out there, each bottle's journey can be tracked via a QR code on the bottle from field to glass. I've now got two Ardnamurchans on my shelf, their core single malt available at most stores nationwide, and a single cask bottling from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, another sponsor of the Whiskey Ring podcast. For that holiday gift, consider a single cask release from the Impex collection. A 6-year-old first fill Oloroso Spanish oak cask, this bottle comes from some of Ardnamurchan's earliest stocks. Only 300 bottles are available from cask number 86P, bottled at a hefty 58.2% ABV. Check out the website, or reach out if you want help grabbing a bottle. Happy holidays, everyone. Enjoy your whiskey responsibly, and remember the 2 rules of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Drink what you like, and drink it how you like it. Hey, Whiskey Ringers. I hope you've been taking advantage of that podcast-only code for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. They've got around 20 bottlings coming out each month, and there's never a shortage of new things to explore. For the holiday season, December, January, we've got even more bottles than usual available to try and available to buy. If you are a US-based listener, there are at least 12 casks just for this month's release, plus additional ones coming out. If you are a UK listener or an EU listener, there are over 30, a ridiculous number of bottles that you can try and get your hands on. Remember to use code WRP at checkout to get 25% off your annual membership. And when you get that special bottle, post a picture on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, and tag us at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring, Whiskey Ring Podcast, and hashtag Whiskey Ring to let us know you've got that great bottle in hand.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a fair observation, but I'm going to turn it the other way around and say that the expansion that we're probably going to start looking at next year, relocation, we've got in our minds that we want to effectively double capacity. So to put it in context, our current capacity is 50,000 litres of pure alcohol a year. That equates to, in understandable terms, a barrel a day. That's where we're up to. We would like to double that to 100,000. Now, that doesn't sound a lot when you talk about large distilleries and they're filling 300 barrels a day. We're talking about moving from 1 barrel to 2 barrels a day. But in the grand scheme of Bimber, that would be massive. That's a game changer for us. But I don't think, and nor do we want it to be bigger than that. The processes that we're offering, 7-day, 168-hour fermentation, um, the distillation with fire, but it's virtually all day to do a distillation run. It's not quick. And we're not prepared to compromise on those processes. So in that sense, making whiskey the Bimber way, it only scales a little bit. If you want to really scale that up, you're going to end up with even more inefficiencies that we have. We have inefficiencies that we have to work with to make whiskey this way. And so in that sense, when you're looking at the farm, yeah, they can provide us with twice as much. So that's not actually going to be a limiting factor here. Sure, if we were saying, hey, we're going to be 10 times as big, absolutely, that farm wouldn't do. But we're not going to be, and we don't want to be, and it doesn't feel that we're not going to make any compromises on the quality of our distillate and our whiskey, and B, that type of expansion, it just wouldn't be us. There are plenty of whiskey distilleries of a massive scale. They do amazing jobs at what they do, and we're very happy to let them do it. We feel we've got a particular area of the market where we're amazing at what we do, and all we want to do is do a little bit more of it and fundamentally make it easier for us to work in the space that we've got. It's pretty tricky to try to do all the different things that we do, which, other than growing the barley, is every other part of the process, all the way through to packaging and dispatching. Everything is done under one roof, and it's bloody difficult. And so, really, what we'd like to do is just to make our lives a bit easier, and to get more Bimber into the hands of people who want to drink it, particularly markets such as your own in the US, where we've sent out a few bottlings, a few casks to Raj, and they've been very well received. So yeah, we'd like to be in a position to be doing more of that.
Yeah, the ones that I've gotten to try have been absolutely fantastic. And it's
Thank you.
good to hear that the current farm can supply the doubled
Yeah,
capacity.
yeah,
So I want to take a slight tangent there for a few minutes before going back into the kind of on-site processes. In listening to other interviews and reading interviews and trying to do research for the episode, of course, the idea of this single farm came up multiple times, but I don't think I saw the question asked, was the idea to start from a single farm to begin with? And I asked that because I know that commodity grain was not the goal, but there's also kind of a balance between the single farm, one farmer, one, if you want to use the term, terroir from that farm,
yeah.
versus a couple of very small farmers, but still multiple ones. So, how did the choice to use just one farm come about?
Sure. So it's a combination of. I'm not going to go into terroir. There are other distilleries who
That's
that's
totally
their
fine.
focus.
Yeah.
I'm totally down with it, and I'll happily talk about it in other circumstances. But for Bimber, it's not our focus. But it's a combination between the profile and extractability of that grain and the relationship that we have with Fordham and Allen, the farmer. In terms of the profile and what they're doing there, we just love the grain that they grow. It's just perfect for our needs. And every distiller needs to have complete trust in the supplier of their ingredients. Whether you want to go down the terroir discussion or not, the quality and the consistency of those ingredients is absolutely tantamount to making a good quality product. So that's one thing. But the more, not limiting factor, but an equally as important thing for us is that Bimber, being an urban distillery, has no grain storage. We don't have silos alongside a distillery. When you go up to, I'm sure in America as well, when you're outside of the urban zones, you have distilleries with large amounts of land, so they can take large amounts of grain, stick them in silos and hoppers, and so long as the rats and the moisture don't get in, they're good for a pretty long amount of time. We don't have any of that. So that means that we need grain deliveries every single week. And so we need a relationship with a farmer who's happy to do that. Because that's some ask. I mean, Basingstoke into London, it's not 5 minutes away. It's an hour or so, or more on bad traffic as you get into London. So it's a combination between having the exact type of grain that we want, that we're happy with in terms of its profile, its extractability, its ability to produce a clear wort, which is what we're looking for. We don't mill the grain; we just crack it open. Another difference in processing that we do to most distilleries. But fundamentally, it's about that relationship with the guys at Fordham and Allen. They're going to be delivering every single week, and so we've got that that frequency, but B, that consistency. So for us, it was it was always just that's the type of relationship that we were looking for, and we're very fortunate that that's the type of relationship and supply that we've got.
And it's a perfect segue into the next question, was that idea that you're just cracking the grain rather than milling it. Um, in thinking about it, I think it's pretty easy to understand anyway. But I was also thinking about it in terms of like a peppercorn, like a peppercorn crusted steak or something, where if you sprinkle ground pepper on the steak, you're just going to get just a hell of a lot of guaiacol and black pepper, just burning your mouth. But if it's peppercorn crusted, where it's really that thick, very coarse crust on it instead, you get that, but it's very flavorful. You get the fruitiness from the pepper, and everything that goes with it, and the texture as well. So I guess the question there is twofold. Of course, how did that decision come about? But also, is there anyone else doing that?
I'm loving the analogy, David, because it's another steak analogy. So I'm probably going to steal that one. So you might hear me on other podcasts in the future when people talk about why we're doing this, giving your example. I'll try and trademark it to you because it's perfect. You're spot on. It's the difference between, you can get peppery flavor from any pepper. It's a dip, but for me, it's the right amount, right? So what we're looking for from the grain is the right amount of extractability. We are not concerned with yield. Well, that's a little bit too firm. We're not, yield is not our important concern. It's a concern for every distillery, but we put flavor and profile above yield, right? So in that sense, we crack the grain because it provides us with exactly what we need. We do not need to mill it down to fines to get what we need to make the wash, the first tranche of alcohol that we're going to reinforce. In doing it that way, because we don't extract the fines, we end up with what's called a clear wort. That doesn't mean that it's see-through. It very much isn't. It's a big murky liquid, but its profile is fruity and cereal right from the start, rather than it having that sort of that the character you get from flour, from fines. So again, that decision it's one that just came by playing around with it, testing what flavors do we get. We're going to have to do this all up in Scotland in the next few months. Where do we want it to be? Rather than working with an assumption that you go to a lot of distilleries, and one of the first things they do when they show you their mill, which we don't use, is they'll show you the shaker box, and those percentages of husks to all the way down to fines, they're pretty even. You might find a few percentage here or there between distilleries, but everyone sort of does it that way. And yeah, we just decided, rather than going, okay, well, how are we going to change our percentage, to think of it completely differently, to think of it of, well, what flavor do we want to get from this grain? And so that's what got us to the place of, actually, you know what, we don't need to mill this at all. We can get just as much extraction to get our wash up to, 8 and a bit percent ABV, which is exactly where you want before you're charging a still, without putting in all this extra material. And to be honest, it's why we don't apply a third water when it comes to mashing. We only use a strike and one single sparge, because again, we're not looking at washing through all those fines at a higher temperature. And yeah, we get exactly what we want. We're not worried about the extra liters that we're going to get, because we'd rather have that pure profile to go into the fermenters than to worry about a few extra liters, which is actually going to provide both dilution and a different flavor profile. In terms of your follow-up question of, do I know of anyone else doing it? My answer is I don't. That doesn't mean that they aren't, but I don't know of anyone doing it.
I mean, I'll admit that I think the inference there was also, do you know anyone in England or Scotland doing it? But it goes beyond that. I haven't heard of anyone in the US doing it, or
I'm
Canada.
I'm
So
pretty. I think I can say fairly confidently. I'll say with high confidently, no one in England is currently doing it, and I'll say with fair confidence, see that no one in Scotland is doing it. The rest of the world is such a big place in terms of distilling. I wouldn't like to make any assertions that I can't back up. I haven't heard of anyone anywhere in the world doing it. Yeah, it's that balancing act. I mean, whichever way you do it, you're going to end up with something that you can convert in fermentation. But certainly when you start to look at scale, then efficiency and yield is tantamount. It's absolutely super important when you're dealing with millions and millions of liters. When you're looking at a small urban distillery with an output of 50,000 LPA, for us, it's worth the notional loss of liquid to focus on the profile of the spirit. But yeah, if you're at scale and that loss of liquid over per annum is, 200,000 liters or something, you might think differently about it.
Sure.
But for us, it's a no-brainer. We want to make the best liquid possible, and that loss of some additional fermentability is fractional to us, absolutely fractional.
And with using the cracked grain in particular, you mentioned you get a very clear wort, or not crystal clear like you might get in Japan, but clearer than this porridge like mix
Yeah.
that you might get elsewhere. Uh, Again, I keep asking the same question, it seems, but the why did that happen? But and you've answered that one for the wort. But to go along with that, the from a very technical standpoint, I'm thinking about, do you then not agitate in the fermenters? You kind of just allow things to ferment as they will with the double fermentation you guys do, the initial yeast and then the malolactic fermentation.
Correct. Yeah, we just leave it. Um, the washbacks are they're pretty narrow and tall. If you were to sort of look at them in profile, they are quite tall. Um, that initial vigorous fermentation on the yeast provides enough circulation of that liquid for what we're looking for. We are filling them vertically, so that's what's oxygenating before you pitch the yeast, so that your eventual wash has enough oxygen for that yeast to really thrive. Um, but equally, what we really want to do is simply leave it. We just want to leave that there, and we want the pitch yeast to do its thing, which invariably it will. But then we want the wild airborne yeast to then be able to tune in to the bacteria that we leave in the American oak in those wooden washbacks. And so really it just kind of does itself. Obviously, that makes it sound simplistic, like we just sort of built a thing and threw it in there and here you go. And that's not the case. We originally started with steel washbacks, whilst for the first year of Bimber, for like 110 casks, there was steel. And because we have this engineering, construction, architecture firm up the road, they're providing all effectively our coopers. So they built those vessels, designed by Darius. He's the maestro when it comes to plant and building things. And then there would have been a process again of, right, okay, how much yeast? How long? How are we doing these things with those fermenters? But fundamentally, it is actually as simple as tip it in, pitch your yeast, and wait. The one thing that we control, that we don't allow to just do its thing, to be wild, is temperature. So each of those 7 fermenters, and I think they've become sort of a slightly iconic scene of Bimber. You won't see those fermenters anywhere in the world. We do get breweries occasionally asking us, could we build them some? But they're quite labor intensive, and they're not cheap to make. And the idea being is that really we want to allow as much wild ferment as possible, but within some type of confines. And those confines for us are temperature. So we have heated chiller units just above the 7 washbacks, one for each day of the week. And they either heat or chill those washbacks to keep them within roughly an 8-degree variance, which is simply where the yeast likes to operate. Everything else about it is, yeah, it's pretty dirty. It gets like a Karcher jet wash, but we don't use any cleaning in place. And we just believe in letting nature take its course. We apply some yeast, we let the yeast go through its curve,
Mhm.
and then we just leave it. And so that wash, when it starts to hit sort of day 6 or day 7, it's amazingly fruity, but it's starting to sour. It's becoming that fruity. And the reason being is simply that we fundamentally believe that distillation is reinforcing the flavors created during fermentation. And so it's the one stage, it's my favorite stage of whiskey production, as it were, before it gets to the barrel, because you're creating so much potential for experimentation and flavor there. And people just don't realize it. They're just like, yeah, you just need to get it to 8% and then off you go. No, it's what you've got inside of that wash. It's not just the volume of alcohol, it's the flavor you've created. And so, yeah, this wild yeast feels a bit crazy, but actually it's about as natural as they come in its second phase, that malolactic wild yeast exhibited fermentation. It's just simply taking a liquid and leaving it.
And we'll get to the wild yeast in a second too. There's been, I've noticed kind of a very strong division in what you just talked about in terms of like the distiller's beer or the wash that comes out, where some distilleries are very concerned with, or let me flip that. Many distilleries are not that concerned with the flavor and the taste of that fermented
Yeah,
the mash, because they figure it's, whatever flavors the yeast has created, it's going to be distilled, and then they can control it through there. There are a couple that really do focus on that distiller's beer and make it to a point where it's palatable. It's something that you would almost want to drink. Like I give the example of Westward, where they make a distiller's beer that if you threw some hops in there, you'd have a wonderful Pacific Northwest IPA.
absolutely.
It's that good. And I got to try it, and their new make, oddly enough, is tastes like bread from Outback Steakhouse. Just there's no it's all clear. That's exactly what it tastes like. But anyway, so jumping back though, with the wild yeast, so you've got the first phase, first 3 to 4 days, which is the pitched yeast, the distiller
Yeah.
and brewer's
Distillers
yeast.
and bakers yeast, brewers yeast. It's a combination of the two, effectively an in-house combo that we just think does the job properly. And yeah, so we're pitching that for pretty much 4 days, which I would say is roughly the industry standard amount of fermentation. Although a lot of new distilleries are starting to move where we've moved into longer ferments, certainly in English whiskey. White Peak, they're also running a fantastic distillery that I would definitely recommend, up and coming in England. They're running seven-day fermentation as well, and they're using, I believe, spent leftover yeast from a local brewery that makes a beer called Jaipur, a sort of moderately strength, relatively famous beer over here. So they're using that, but again, are running that long ferment. So it is an increasing trend, but it's the one where you're really starting to get some inefficiency into the process, right? That if you can turn these around in 4 days, you're going to get a lot more throughput than leaving it in there for 7 days. But it's the part of the process where, as you said, David, there's this divide between people who just want to get to the ABV and off they distill, and distilleries like Bimber, where we fundamentally believe that whatever you're distilling is completely based off of the wash that you have created. It's crucial to us, and yeah, we find anyone who takes a different view will raise an eyebrow to it, because we're literally not doing that, because we've tried to do it, and we think the results speak for themselves.
And so during that fermentation phase, you got about a 7 day exactly a 7 day fermentation of its 168 hours. So by
Yeah,
day four, like I said, the first wave of yeast is pretty much dead. It's spent itself out. There's enough alcohol in there that it's no longer really functional. And that's when the malolactic fermentation comes in. And that second wave of the wild yeast.
Yep.
So, just to separate them out, the malolactic fermentation, that's coming from the bacteria present in the wood in the washbacks. It's a fascinating process that you, as you said, you don't get with stainless steel. You only get that with wood or a porous.
Something that can hold the bacteria in. So yeah,
Yeah,
if you get something like that in stainless steel, your steel's been pitted, and it's probably not gonna you're not gonna get that effect. You're probably just gonna get a washback that's spoiled. You need the wood for the bacteria to live in a harmonized environment, effectively, where it becomes a natural part of the thing rather than something that you might treat as a taint.
exactly. Uh, with that wild yeast, curious if you and Bimber have done any kind of studies on what kind of yeast you're coming up with. And I asked that just because obviously London being London, it's a massive international city. That even if you're not in the heart of the city, if you're in North Acton, you're still going to get just this massive variation in what's in the air. So I'm curious if you've kind of studied what kind of yeast you're getting, if it's the same one or ones each time, and because that does ultimately go towards the flavor profile you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a bit before my time, so that's something I would have to go back and look through the annals to see what work initially was done on that. I'd be very surprised if we didn't do a little bit of analysis on it. I haven't got that information to hand to say what type of yeast it is. Equally, you're completely correct, David. That that's based on your environment. It's based on the conditions, the building, where you are, the temperature, humidity, etc. And we're going to be doing the same thing in Scotland, long open top ferment, but it's going to be different there because of that environment.
Sure.
Yeah, that's one I just have to get back to in terms of really looking at the details of those early studies into it. That's a pretty technical question that I don't get asked a lot. What
Sure.
type of wild geese? Jesus. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one.
I am a big nerd when it comes to anything whiskey, I
Yeah,
guess.
so
I
that's
was going
even
to
too
say yeast,
nerdy for
but
me. I'm pretty nerdy, and that one's beyond my nerd level.
yeah. Hey, what can I say? I gotta ask questions that people don't ask, otherwise it's no fun. So,
Yeah. You got to test us. It's what you're here for.
right. So, all right. So we got the fermentation. Moving on to the next stage, the distillation. We talked about the stills that you've got, the line arms, the setups and such. Um, so we kind of do understand the Bimber as it stands now process from getting the grain all the way to certainly to casking, if not to bottling. Um, so I want to just pause there for a second and ask, you guys at Bimber, and it sounds like you're going to do the same thing at Dunphail, have a very wide range of casks that you use. And I feel like I keep
We
using
do
throwing in
now.
these like varies and these superlatives, but it's really true. Like you guys have a lot of variation. So,
We,
yeah,
we, we, we do now, David, but originally when we started, it was actually quite narrow. We started off primarily, and it's still the mainstay of our fields of ex-bourbon, um, two types of sherry, Oloroso PX, virgin and port. And that was it. When Bimber started, those originally, that was our entire slate of cask fills. But what's happened is, particularly over the last sort of 18 months, sorry, it's my doorbell. Particularly over the last 18 months, we have been trying to experiment and see what the flexibility of our spirit is. So whilst we know that it works super well with those original cast types, and we had the early releases that we did, variations on those themes, we've really been trying to see where the limits of our whiskey lie. And touch wood, we haven't found them yet. So we've spent that sort of last 18 months really experimenting with lots of different, I mean, not necessarily wood types, but precursor liquids. So how does it work with, and we've worked our way through pretty much the range of sherry from floor sherries, Fino, Amontillado, all the way up to the oxidative sherries, so Moscatel and PX and everything in between. I'm responsible for all the beer cask projects. So yeah, we're just pushing it out there. One, to see for ourselves what really works, and two, because we like keeping surprising people. We like coming up with things where people are like, wow, what's this, and how does it work? There's bound to be a cask type that doesn't work. In my head, it's going to be some type of wine, because I'm always nervous about wine casks because of their level of tannins and particularly their acidity. But we haven't got there yet. So yeah, it's there are quite a few different cask types now, but the mainstay of what we're doing remains ex-bourbon. It's the cask where, despite those casks being now a little harder to get than they used to be, and certainly more expensive, it's the cask type where if someone said what's Bimber, I'd say try this, and it would be ex-bourbon. It's the cask that lends itself to our profile. Um, Dunphail, yeah, my intention is somewhat similar. Um, so I'm going to be looking at a sort of core range of wood that I'm going to source initially. And then as we get down the line, expand it outwards. I think that's a sensible way of going, to find out where your core profiles and flavors initially fit. Get some casts that you just completely trust, that you're happy with, before you start putting it into weird and wacky things. But equally, what I'm going to be looking up in Scotland is a lot more hogsheads and refill wood. Um, and that is simply my preference as a whiskey drinker and a whiskey person. When I'm not working for Bimber or Dunphail, I look at what type of whiskies that I like, and the things that I favor. And yeah, I'm just a big fan of refill wood and hogsheads, for the reason that they are a little bit slower. They can allow the spirit to really shine over and above the wood. Um, those will be the sort of things that you're not going to see in initial releases from Dunphail. You're going to need to get a little bit more flavor in it a bit quicker. But certainly, what I want to do is to get some of those casks laid down early doors, because it's just simply a representation of who I am and what I like. And I just think that so many whiskies, whilst they can be fantastic, young and punchy in a first fill cask, thinking about where they are at 12, 15, 18 years, sometimes those casks can be pretty extractive. And so, yeah, I just love, in terms of profiles, where you've got a really strong spirit, but actually the wood has had a longer mellowing influence. So, yeah, similar idea at both distilleries, but yeah, perhaps a little bit more of a matte spin at Dunphail, as that's kind of what I'll be doing there. But yeah, you can expect the sort of the core, known casks, ex-bourbon, PX Oloroso. We've got great sources of those casks from either Kelvin Cooperage or bodegas in Spain. We don't use seasoned casks. We only use pretty much ex-Solera casks, or casks that have been used to make those fortified wine products, rather than on spec for the industry. As a start, and then yeah, watch this space both with Bimber and Dunphail as that develops for some funkiness. There's lots of things at Bimber that we have sitting around that we haven't spoken about, or we're testing and may or may not happen. And yeah, it's part of the fun, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are two things there I want to follow up on. The first one being uh, the use of Solera sherry casks as opposed to seasoned ones.
Yep.
And this is a part of a conversation I started with Monique Houston, who's based in Chicago, but she's really kind of an authority on sherry casks. And there are so many bodegas nowadays that are just throwing the sherry in the cask just for the purposes of seasoning the casks, for use by the whiskey industry.
Yep.
As opposed to those ones that are actually made for drinking, that are then passed around to people like us. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that first category, but the second one,
absolutely not.
The Solera system, where it's really purposefully made to be drinking. I think of a food analogy of, you want to cook with a wine that you would drink, because you're going to get the flavor of that wine in the dish. So for me, while you could use a cooking wine or something that you wouldn't necessarily drink, it's just going to be better by using something that you would enjoy on your own, because you also know the profile more, you get a better flavor from it, a stronger flavor. So I did want to mention that, so I'm glad you brought that up. The other one was that the idea of creating the profile. And so, Bimber uh, being founded in 2015, first production 2016, you've had time now to create a profile of your own, to have that
Yep.
kind of very classic single malt, English, not Scottish, of course, but single malt whiskey in an ex-bourbon cask, very classic, uh, at different ABVs, and provide that profile that then you can go to the sherries, the hell, let's throw them out there, the rum, tequila, virgin casks, whatever it may
Yep.
be, and say, okay, here's our original. Here's that core flavor and character and profile. Here's what it could be in those other casks. And that was really my first introduction to Bimber, was with Raj doing, I think it was 3 casks that were unique to the US. It was
Yep.
the ex
Those three
bourbon,
casks. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the virgin oak, and sherry was the third one.
It was sherry. Yeah, it was a
It
sherry.
was
Yeah,
sherry.
we did. It was one of the early. We called it the country collection, where we just wanted to get those casts out into different countries where we had this sort of slight sort of bubbling interest in Bimber. And so yeah, working with Raj and Glass Revolution, we gave the US market effectively one of the three main each of the three main casts we were doing in early days. And yeah, let people sort of try it in three different shapes. So Au Natural, as I'm going to describe it, the ex bourbon, which I think is our sort of calling card, the virgin cask, where you're taking the fundamental flavors that you're getting from ex bourbon, but you're really dialing them up, particularly on the spice, and then that sherry, which is a completely different tangent. But what we're really very keen to do, and what we're mindful of, is making sure that no matter where you come in to Bimber, whether that's tasting with us or at a distillery where you try the new make, or through one of our ex bourbon marriages, or through a single cask, we really want to have a recognizable Bimber profile. We want, particularly when they're doing a tasting and a flight, we want them to see that journey and understand, yeah, I can taste the spirit here. So we're really quite determined about that, and it's one of the reasons why we don't use seasoned casks. We are looking for casks that have been used to make the proper product because of authenticity, but we're also looking for the flavor that they impart. And we want something that's well rounded and melds with our spirit and with our whiskey when we're finishing. We're not just looking to try to get as much fortified wine flavor into something, because you'll find that sometimes you get amazing whiskeys, they're absolutely delicious, but then you say, well, where's it from? And it could be from anywhere. It could be absolutely anywhere. And that's not to say that whiskey isn't tasty and that people don't enjoy it, but the cask has smothered the spirit. And we really try, particularly when we're using, full term maturations, we really try to make sure that our spirit is front and center, because we've put all that time and that effort into making it. Otherwise, you could just get that whiskey that was made really quickly, that spirit is made really quickly. We don't care about the flavors of ferment. We just want to purify it and then stick it in a big fat cask and bury it. It's just so the opposite of everything I've told you. So yeah, our wood policy very much follows our spirit policy. It has to create that Bimber effect, to have something where the spirit and the cask merge, but you never lose sight of all the effort and all the flavor that we've put into the physical production up to the distillate stage.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think it's a perfect way to close out around the Bimber specific kind of things that you're doing. Just to add in, of course, when this episode comes out, there will be links to not only Bimber and the projects being done there, but also reviews of and tasting notes from the different casks that you've been doing, the couple that I got to try with Raj, a couple more from the Drammer set. And I mean, I'll be honest, I've been saying this more and more, and I'm hoping this is not hurting my credibility, but I've been getting very, very good samples and very good bottles from people, and I haven't put out a bad review recently because it's just getting good casks. So with that, so there'll be more about Bimber, putting in this history of the company as well. So noting that we're at the top of the hour, I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about 2 other topics. One being Dunphail, whatever we haven't covered so far with them, But also, before we get there, taking the 30,000 foot view of English whiskey.
Sure.
So, if I mean, at this point, if you're listening to this podcast, unless this is your very first episode, you've heard talk of what happened with prohibition, both globally and in the U.S., in terms of its effect on any number of countries' whiskey industries, including Scotland and Ireland and England. And really, at the end of the day, it seems as though Scotland was kind of the last man standing. That's how they gained so much market share with the blends and such, and places like the U.S. and England and Ireland just had to consolidate and catch up. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more about what was the English distilling scene like, and what has it kind of gone through, and where is it now?
Sure. So a lot of this history is kind of lost. And so to find any, you really need to look at an author called Alfred Barnard, who wrote a seminal tome where he went to distilleries around pretty much the whole of United Kingdom, and wrote about it. You're going right back into the 19th century. A lot of people 10 years ago would have said English whiskey, ha 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 ha. What is this? Whiskey's not made in England. Um, and there's two things to say to that. Number one, there used to be back in the 20th century, the last English distillery, Lee Valley, which was over Stratford in East London, closed. And I think it's a combination of various historical effects, differences in the market in terms of much of the whiskey produced in the UK at that point was virtually all of it, in fact, blended. Um, and in some ways independently bottled. We think of whiskey as being single malt. We think of whiskey as coming from the distilleries, but actually that is not whiskey's story at all. Whiskey's story was that the distilleries provided it to purveyors who blended it and then sold it through their shops and through their bars. And yeah, English whiskey just never really got a foothold on that. And so the last distillery closed in 1905, Lee Valley. And then nothing happened for, I guess, nearly 100 years. And then the first sort of Renaissance English distillery, they've been going now over 15 years, St. George's over in Norfolk. They were the pioneer, the first of the new English distilleries. But they've swiftly been followed by quite a number more. I was at the first physical English Whiskey Festival last Saturday representing Bimber, and it was amazing. It was a statement of intent from a rapidly growing industry that, you've gone from 20 years ago, the start of one distillery, the first of modern era, St. George's. You've had the likes of the Lakes, Cotswolds, Bimber, following up. But now, if you look at it, there's within a few years' time, you're going to have whiskey at around 30 different English distilleries. And you could do this story and somewhat transpose it onto Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey has had a situation where you've effectively had 3 distilleries for years, and then all of a sudden you're going to end up with 40 different ones. Mm. And it's all part and parcel of the global whiskey boom, that there's just so many more people who are passionate about spirits and about whiskey, which has now led to a situation where there are gaps in the market where this is possible. But equally, there are mindsets where more often than not, when you now say English whiskey to someone, even if they don't know whiskey, their immediate reaction is not to either laugh or make a joke that if it's not Scottish, American, or Irish, it can't be whiskey. That used to be, so eight years ago, if you said to me, oh, there's going to be over 30 English distilleries and they're going to have this festival together, I would have said, I just can't see that happening. That's so far away. But it's happened really, really quickly. We've now got the English Whiskey Guild, which is effectively the trade body for the industry by the industry. Bimber, myself, I represent Bimber on that board. And we're looking to put in indeed we have put in a geographic indicator to define English whiskey so that we can avoid bad actors coming in mainly coming into England and saying, here's this English single malt, when actually it's just grain from, I don't know, somewhere around the world. This sort of the English whiskey brand is growing. Not just as a it's better than Scotch. I don't believe it is. It's obviously related to it, but simply as a valid alternative. And that's kind of my dream. My dream is that when you go on a retailer's website, rather than you click whiskey and it says Scottish, Irish, American, Japanese, and then it says world. And my dream is at some point in my lifetime, England is not in world. It's top line. It is English whiskey, and it sits alongside its peers. I believe it is being made of a quality to do so already, and I find that pretty staggering. I believe the innovation is as forward thinking as any whiskey producing nation in the world, and it's just a matter of time and awareness for potentially my dream to happen, that it is just considered as an equal alternative. Someone turns up to a party with a bottle of Scotch, someone else with a bottle of English whiskey, and everyone just enjoys it. They enjoy both things because they're both quality products. But it really is remarkable how this has all happened, since I've been around the whiskey world. It's so incredibly quickly. Of course, the danger is that, times are now economically different. We've just gone through a period where life, I guess, to a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people, seemed pretty easy. And growth was just there. And we seem to be entering a world situation where that's not always the case. And I suspect that, some of these distilleries are just not going to survive. I think that's just the nature of any sort of boom in business, that you get players coming into the market and either because they weren't geared up for it or didn't have the right product or just bad luck. They don't all survive. But nevertheless, I do think that English whiskey has now already established itself as a category. It's not going to disappear like it did in 1905 to another 100 years. English whiskey is here. And yeah, this event I went to on Saturday, wow, like 350 people, all interested in English whiskey. What a statement for the future of this new category of distilling. Amazing.
It is. It really is, and it's exciting. I mean, the only other English distillery that I can think of off the top of my head that I've had, let's put it this way, that I've had that I remember, was Spirit of Yorkshire.
Yep.
They were, and I've just had they recently came to the US and more than just Canada. They were Canada, more than just California. So they're Filey Bays going across the country. Of course, Bimber is entering kind of through the other direction through New York. So it's easier for me to get, I'm based in New York. But it's also, there's a big point there to be made as well, that it's not just, St. George's in Norfolk. There's, and you're in London. It's not just East Anglia. It's the Lake District. It's Yorkshire. It's
throughout
it's
every region. Every region. Yeah. Yeah,
right.
It's there's a nice map. If you look up this English whiskey map on Google, you'll find it, and yeah, you can really appreciate that it's Scotland. I mean, distilling's throughout, but then you look at the map and you're like, wow, there's a lot of distilleries along this one river in this region called Speyside. And in England, no, there's no real concentration of they're all here, they're all there. They are very, very dispersed throughout the entire country, which I think is fantastic. It just means that if someone visits a part of the country, that they've got a whiskey distillery that's never that far away from them. I think that's amazing.
It is. And this is the last question on this section was that you mentioned you now have the English Whiskey Guild, of which you're a part, and you're trying to put in these industry defined standards for what English whiskey will be, and you've submitted the geographic indicator. This was from an interview 2.5 years ago, so things might have changed, but at that point, you were talking about how the UK, and I think I wrote UK, I meant England. Horrible of me. England didn't have its own standards. It was mainly focusing or following, SWA regulations.
Somewhat following EU regulations, many of which were fairly comparable to SWA.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking things like, it had to be 3 years old, it had to be so broadly following, if not to the exact letter, but broadly the idea of what
Sure,
the SWA is putting out and
sure,
the EU is putting out. So I can't help but think about the comparison to the American Single Malt Commission, American Single Malt Standards of Identity. So I don't know if you follow this side of the pond on that, but they submitted their proposed regulations in 2016, and only in July or August was it finally put up for public comment period of this year, so 6 years. Uh, but the idea was
wow,
to create this American geographic indicator for American single malts. Many of the things were the same, 100% malted barley, distilled in America, all that. Um, could be newer used cooperage, up to 700 liters. So certain things kept the same. And a few things different just to allow for kind of the American spin on it, if you will. And I'm thinking about this, and again, I couldn't help think of the comparison that you guys are putting in this geographic indicator to say English whiskey is not just part of the broader UK whiskey. It's not, you can't just switch out the term and put it Scotch, but made in England. It's really its own thing. And so, with the, let's say, 2.5 years since that initial interview took place, and now you've got the guild, what kind of separators do you want to see, or does the guild want to see that really put English whiskey in its
sure.
light?
Sure. So I'm not going to overstep the mark here, David, because we have submitted the document. It has been through numerous changes involving a lot of stakeholders, and it will be coming out for public consultation imminently, which is great. Not 6 years, but a little while. Always longer than you imagine, but not 6 years. However, that does mean that it would be improper of me to run through sort of blow by blow all the differences. What I would say is there are areas of that GI where things are obviously specified as having to take place in England. If you're going to make something that's being described as made in England or English, then those constituents need to have come and taken place in England. I don't think that'll surprise anybody. There are some elements that you're going to see that, yeah, they're sort of no change from the way that you would have imagined English whiskey has been currently operating in terms of what we discussed around, EU standards, and then also, the sort of leading the way from the SWA in terms of how they make whiskey. So there's going to be things in there where you're like, well, that's the same. There are some differences. I'm not going to elucidate on them at the minute. You'll have to wait for the consultation to come out. But there are some differences where we are providing room for distillers who, if they do want to do certain different things, that they've got they've got a little bit of a runway where they can play around and they can manipulate those variables for the sake of experimentation and innovation. So it's partly around providing that set standard. It's partly around preventing bad actors from passing off products that aren't made in a way that would mark them out as quality. But at the same time, yeah, we do want to we want it to help English whiskey grow. We want to use it as a basis for discussion and for people to use to innovate.
Fair enough. And should note as well, there is another parallel. The American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, before and during the regulations becoming under the public comment period, they were very good about speaking with one voice, to a T and to a fault, I would say. I mean, it was a single voice, even though there were 140 something distilleries involved, and it was incredibly impressive. And it seems like the English Guild is doing the same kind of idea of just one voice. It's easier, it's simpler, it's also more effective. So we will come back to you when those go public, and hopefully when they go through, to maybe bring you on for a couple minutes just to talk about, when you can talk about it more, of course. But I
No,
won't
I'm
push you any
happy
further on
happy
that.
to Yeah, no, happy to come back and do a little pickup on yeah, what's actually sort of public. And at that point you're going to have, yeah, difference of opinions of it should be this, it should be that, and we can talk around the whole thorny issue that is simply setting standards, because
Mhm.
it is not an easy process, and it's not an easy process to do it where you get everybody on the same page and everybody agreeing with everything. Because if
Mhm.
it was, then all these things would have been done years ago and it'd be easy.
Right. And there's always at least one distillery that doesn't fit in there that's like, well, you guys are going to screw me if he goes through. So, um,
It's honestly very difficult, David. But yeah, let's pick that one up when the consultation's out there, and we can look at the work through the document together, and you can ask me my thoughts, and maybe get a few other English distilleries on the podcast, and they
yeah.
they can pick it up from their perspectives. I mean, certainly Bimber is, as we've alluded to, it's a very traditional distillery. Our innovation is in some ways backwards. It's looking to the past in what we're doing rather than trying to do lots of sort of modern, futurist, funky things. So in that sense, you could, other than it being in England and not in Scotland, you could take what we do up to Scotland, and we pretty much comply with everything up there already. But one size doesn't fit all, and I know a lot of distilleries want to do different things for different reasons, and want to look to the future rather than to the past, or yeah, want to innovate through different setups and different processes and even different grains. And it's trying to make as much room as possible to allow that to happen, but equally to safeguard baseline quality standards throughout.
Perfect. Perfect. And I'm going to contradict myself just for time considerations, to punt on the Dunphail for now. Um,
Sure.
Circle back in a few months when it's set up and you've got a little more on there. Just because there are a couple questions I want to ask you offline in the time allotted. But in the meantime, you know, Matt, thank you so much for spending the time to go through what Bimber does and how it got to where it does and the history of it. Hope we asked a couple of new questions here. I will look for that email about the wild yeast types because again, nerds, nerds got a nerd. So, but in the meantime, there will be links to Bimber's website, social media, the reviews, where you can find it, if you can find it, because as Matt said, these bottles go quickly when they come out. So keep an eye out. Um, in the meantime, it's been a blast. Matt McKay, thank you for coming into the Whiskey Ring. Hang on with me for a sec after again the recording. And
No,
it's
thank you
been
so much, David. It's been absolutely my pleasure. Some great probing questions. Really fun to spend some time with you. Really enjoyable, and yeah, I hope your listeners have, if they haven't heard of Bimber, then our discussion has piqued some interest. If not into Bimber, then into some of the processes that we've spoken about. Which yeah, they're all pretty nerdy stuff, which certainly appeals to me, and I'm looking forward to digging out that yeast stuff for you, and then putting it top of mind in case someone else tries to ask me a really tricky one.
fair enough. Oh, and I'll also be throwing in a link to Matt's blog that he writes for, that he's created and writes for, the Dramble, which I was looking at quite a bit yesterday and today, looking through articles. So there'll be a link to that as well. But in the meantime,
Thank
Matt,
you.
thank you so much. It's been another episode of the
Cheers.
Whiskering Podcast. I'll see you guys next week.